Haidong! So in this video, we're going to be talking about the concept of push-pull in terms of your cut and ways it may or may not work. All right, so if you're not familiar with the idea of the push-pull in terms of sword cutting, right? The general adage is when you're cutting, you're going to push with your right hand, pull with your left, to kind of give yourself that extra leverage when you cut. So let's talk about two different understandings of that phrase. Again, the phrasing of push-pull with your cut is very ubiquitous in the sword community. So not just in Gumdo, but also in Gumdo, Kendo, Yaido. All of these things kind of like add that idea in. So let's talk about that with a little bit of detail. Right, so one interpretation of it is I am going to be pushing with the right hand, pulling with the left, kind of give yourself that good leverage this way. Another interpretation is going to be I am going to be pushing with the right hand, I'm going to be pulling it through this way. So as opposed to merely doing this kind of thing, I'm going to be pushing with the right, dragging with the left, and cutting through this way. So the pros and cons of the first concept of the push-pull. So a pro of it is going to be that gives you a lot of speed really quickly, right? So the jerk in it, or the change in accelerations, pretty drastic, right? So it's bun, bun, bun with a cut. So you can get into a pretty fast cut pretty quickly, right? So if I am in close range, right, it might be easier for me to kind of use a push-pull motion to do like a little whipping strike or a snap strike if you ever do any knife fighting, right? So that might work. I'm also going to talk about how it may not necessarily help your cut, at least in this interpretation of it. So firstly, if we think about that push-pull motion, right? So again, this is almost like pivoting around the center here. Notice what happens to my left hand. So I'm going to slide forward a little bit. So notice what happens to my left hand. That's really bent. So in the previous video, we talked about how you want to have this 135 or 3/4 angle, right? So you want to have that so you can drag through. Mostly so you don't damage your wrist, right? So if, again, always practice with targets, practice with your partner. So try doing a few of these push-pull motions, and almost always you're going to lose control of your left hand just because it's going to be bent so much. You might get that initial acceleration, it might hurt your opponent, but at the expense of you damaging yourself. So another thing is, if you do that push-pull motion, notice how small your extension is. So for example, if I'm straight on this way, I'm trying to do, diamond cut's pretty easiest to see, but I'm also going to do center. So center cut, if I do a lot of push-pull, right? Versus, again, just compare in the future concept. So the first one, that push-pull motion, very minimal distance, also that bending in the wrist, right? So you don't actually get that much extension. So additionally, so another concept that's going to be pretty, again, ubiquitous with most of swordsmanship is being able to sync your body with your cut, right? So if you're here, so my right hand is pushing it forward, my left hand is pulling it in. My body's trying to move forward maybe with the cut. I'm still trying to breathe to sink everything in. Doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good, right? So there are a lot of different, your body's doing a bunch of different things at once, and it's kind of hard to sync everything together to one cohesive cut into your opponent. So again, if I'm trying to push, trying to pull, I'm trying to move, stuff like that, it's very difficult to synchronize. So additionally, it is going to be harder to get good cutting angles when you're doing stuff like this. So you might get that initial here, but then following through, it's going to be kind of hard to kind of see where you're going, right? So if I'm facing straight on, that was actually not that bad, but if I'm using my push-pull this way, it's a little bit harder to make sure you're hitting the right target this way, again, without damaging your wrist. It's just harder to make sure you have a consistent cutting angle. So again, this is going to be a major, again, running through theme of engaging your smaller muscles as opposed to your bigger muscles. This conception of push-pull is engaging too much of your smaller muscles, right? So you're probably pushing way too much with your right hand. Your right hand's probably dominating most of what you're doing, which should actually be the opposite. The left hand should be dominating most of what you're doing. So if you're here and you're using your right hand kind of like to twist it into a cut, again, small motion, much smaller muscle groups, so it's actually not going to be as clean. In general, it's not going to be as clean of a cut. So the other idea of that push-pull motion is I am pushing my right hand into a cut, and I'm pulling my sword across. This is, at least for me, a better conception of it, right? So if I'm here, I'm able to extend out, so I have that reach where the push-pull maybe didn't have as much. I have that push-pull, I can drag through a target, right? So again, remember, we're using a curved sword. We don't need to use it like an axe or anything like that, where it needs to embed. I just need to glide through. So that pulling motion with the sword is going to be key. So another potential con with this is you're going to be engaging too much of your right arm. Just like with the other push-pull motion, if I'm trying to cut and I'm flicking, again, pushing with my right hand, even if I'm dragging with my left later, that initial push is going to put too much dominance on the right hand. So if I'm cutting this way, it's going to be too much of your right hand cutting, as opposed to letting your left hand dominate. So I'm not particularly a fan of people, or including myself, who just drag things down without putting anything up to replace them. So this is going to be my different spin, my different interpretation, my different idea about how you can actually use a similar concept, but make it a little bit more effective. So this is what I'm going to be calling the pull-drag technique. So if you're here, again, aiming with the bottom of your sword, aiming for your opponent, and having a nice diagonal preparation, right? So I want you to think about translating your swords. Again, think of the mass of the sword being pulled in that direction this way. So you're going to be pulling with the left hand. So the right hand's not doing that much. So pull with the left hand, and as your left hand extends, so again, your left hand is extending, not your right. So your left hand extends, your right hand's going to go along for the ride. So again, translate, so get the mass going. Translate, turn, again, pinky ring middle as you cut, follow through. You can do also the same with the center cut. If I'm here, translate, so translate going forward to get the mass going, and then cut. So why do I recommend this particular technique as opposed to the others? So for one, it's a lot easier to synchronize your body with your cut. So all of your muscles are just pushing something that way. So as opposed to pushing, pulling something this way, everything's going that one direction. It's easy just to get everything going. Easy to synchronize, right? Additionally, this lets your left hand stay dominant as you cut, which is how it should be, right? So your left hand is what's giving you that extra power, and your right hand just kind of letting it go where it needs to go. Using this technique, it'll be easier for you to actually see what you're cutting, right? So if I'm doing the first version, which is doing the push-pull, like I can kind of see I'm trying to cut you, I might do something like that, right? Second version, push, drag down, I can still kind of see where things are going, right? Versus with the pull drag, if I'm pulling it towards my opponent, I can actually feel the bottom of the sword aiming in, honing in on your opponent, and I can follow through. Again, honing in, following through. So again, using this, I can actually guide the sword very cleanly and very consistently across the same target. And additionally, with the pull drag, you're not going to hyperextend as much, right? So with this technique, push pull the first one, my right hand's going to extend too much, versus if I'm going to be pulling this way, no hyperextension. And lastly, so this is going to be true for the second interpretation of the push pull as well as the pull drag, your body's going to naturally stop the cut, right? So if I'm here, I'm pulling it through, my left hand's going to naturally stop, and my right hand's going to naturally stop where the sword's going to be going, right? As opposed to here, again, my left hand's going to be stopping the cut, and this is where it's going to be stopping. Just like with the push-pull, right? So the second conception, pushing with this, pulling with this, again, your body's going to naturally stop what your cut's doing. All right, so that was a general overview of the push-pull. Again, two conceptions of it. You might have a different conception of it, right? So again, these are two ways I've interpreted it. Again, this is a really old adage that's been around for a long time. So it could just be that I haven't interpreted it correctly. So if you've heard anything different, right? So if there's a way that really works for you, leave a comment, let me know.